about military research for World War I and World War II. So I have a couple questions. Is anybody researching as a relative or an ancestor that served in World War I or World War II? Has anybody attempted to do research for World War I or World War II people? And those that have, was it easy? It can be very complex. There are all these layers, especially the higher up you go when it comes to the military and the government. So hopefully today you'll have an idea of where to look, what to find, and what's out there. Now with the digital age, it's just amazing what we have access to, and we'll see a lot of that today. Okay. There we go. Some facts about World War I and World War II. The U.S. enters in 1917, and 4,700,000 servicemen serve in World War I. Of those, there are 116,000 deaths. You can see the wounded. The very last U.S. veteran dies in 2011 at the age of 110. His name was Frank Buckles. He was born in Missouri, and he spent most of his life in West Virginia. And you can see the U.S. population in 1917. It's 103 million people. What's really interesting, if you go down for World War II, you can see the population in 1941 only grew by 30 million people over that time period. So you can see how the Great Depression really affected America. Some things to know about World War II, 16 million men and women served. That comes out to like 8.3% of the entire U.S. population was in uniform from 41 to 1945. So it's pretty impressive. Of that, there were 358,000 women that served in 7 different service groups, the WACs, the WASPs, and so on. We had 405,000 U.S. service people that did not come home, 607,000 wounded, and the Veterans Administration estimates that today out of the 16 million, there are about 1.7 million World War II veterans left in the United States, so less than 10% of all those that served in World War II are still living today, so it's very important for us to document their history before they're gone. We want to preserve everything that we can about their service.
But they say so many are dying every day.
There is, the VA even has how many die per day. It's scary when you look at it. Things to think about when we're going to do this kind of research, questions you want to ask yourself and those you're researching. Do you have the dates of service, the branch of service, the unit, the types of service, location, and if you're really lucky, you might have the service number and rank. And these are really important, especially when we deal with the federal government on trying to find material. So, clues and tips. Of course, talk to the veteran or family members. If they're still living, talk to them. Talk to their children, cousins, friends. This is a great time to get together with the family and try to answer basic questions. Family history, what has been passed down. We all have family stories. You know, Grandpa went to Europe. Write that stuff down. Talk to people that have heard those stories. Some of it you'll see is, it's like solving a mystery. Some of it's true, some of it's fiction, because we all see how things change over time. Really important things, photos, letters, diaries, and documents. I was really lucky. My grandmother knew I loved history from that time I was like 8 years old, so I became the family historian. So she gave me everything that my grandfather brought home from the war. I have photos, I have letters, but I was the only member of the family that had an interest, and without me, I think all of that stuff would have disappeared. So things to think about. Also, you may have a uniform. I have this Navy uniform at home, medals, and things too. Say you're doing genealogy and you go to a cemetery and in your family plot there's a military headstone. Those give you a lot of information that you can take to find more clues about the person. We have to go into the technical stuff, and I love Bill Maudlin. You can read that at the bottom. The branches in World War I and World War II, we have the Army, the Coast Guard, the Marines, the Merchant Marine, and the Navy. And what's missing? The U.S. Air Force, yeah. They were part of the Army. You can see they were the Army Air Corps in 1926, and then in 1941 they became the Army Air Force. And it wasn't until 1947 that we have the U.S. Air Force as we know it today. So there could be some confusion there when people said, I served in the Air Force. You have to figure out where. And then Army units, I'm not going to go through all the different branches and their units, but like you can see how complex these are. This is what the modern Army looks like. You have the squad with 10 men, platoon, company, to make up the officers in charge all the way up to the Army with 100,000 people. So you're going to have relatives that served in a squad, that were in a platoon, that were in a company, that was in a brigade, that was in a corps, that might have been in an army somewhere, and a theater of war. So things to think about. It gets very confusing. Sometimes the Marines are different, the Navy, they're all very different. And then there's the Air Force, which is also very complex, because in World War II, They had 16 Army Air Forces. They had the 1 through the 15th and the 20th. And then it breaks it down by commands. It might be a fighter command. You have divisions and wings. You have groups. That might be a bombardment group, a fighter group, a troop transport group. Squadrons all the way down to flights. So there are all those different levels of confusion when we do this kind of research. But you can figure these out. And there are also lots of neat patches that you may have or inherit from people that served. And they give you a lot of clues as well. So over there, World War I research. You can see these are American troops arrested in a French village. If your descendant served in World War I and was sent to Europe, they probably served somewhere in France, right in here somewhere. And this map comes from West Point. Nowadays with with the internet, there's so many different sources, and they have a fantastic, the West Point History Department has this great collection of maps. You would never think about going to West Point to use their map collection for like family research, but they've got these beautiful maps with all kinds of different conflicts throughout the world. So things to think about, we declared war April 6, 1917. This was year 3. Europe actually went to war in 1914. We had the American Expeditionary Force led by John Pershing. The first doughboys, as they came to be called, arrived in Europe in 1917. And then by May 1918, there were over 1 million U.S. service troops in Europe. And things that we don't think about, all the states had draft registrations. This was the first time, we had a draft during the Civil War, but in 1917 they had the Selective Service Act. And then between the ages of 18 and 45 had to register. And there were state draft cards that were filled out. You also have service cards. And then in Kentucky, like a lot of states, you don't really hear about it, but they gave bonuses for veterans that served in conflicts. And the Kentucky Department of Library and Archives has many of the bonus applications, service cards, and registration cards. And many states give bonuses out for those veterans. And this is my great-grandfather, and this is his service card from New York. So you can see they all look very similar. And these are great because it gives you name, his serial number, which is very important when we get to the federal government level, where he was born. He actually enlisted, so I'll show you these draft registration cards later. He didn't show up because he actually went down and enlisted before the draft started. Where he was born, the units he served with, and you'll learn through research that the military and government love abbreviations and acronyms. So you have to try to figure these out. These are like puzzles themselves. And then whether or not he served overseas and when he was discharged. So you can see he actually didn't go home until July 1919. So even though the war ends in November of 1918, he stays over for another 7 months. Wow. So that was very common with a lot of World War I soldiers. I was going to do my grandfather today, but we'll get to why I don't have his records yet. But a while back, I was in the cemetery in Fort Mitchell, and I came across his headstone, so it was nice to do somebody local. Louis Bresser was born in 1894 in Cincinnati and grew up in Covington, and dies in 1928, but his stone was all by itself. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I'd like to know more about him. And you can see it says that he was from Kentucky, and it mentions that he was a private first class, the 20th Infantry 1st Division. So I thought I wanted to find out more information about Lewis. So we at Kenton County, we have all of the service records for those that came back. These were done by the Kentucky Council for Defense. So anybody that served in World War I from Kenton County, we have this form they filled out. We have about 9,000 of those, and they've all been digitized. So I went and looked at our database, and sure enough, he's in there. So I clicked on that, and you can see what his World War historical record looks like. And all the men that came back filled these out, so you get his name, where he was living. You can see all the different units that he served with. He was very efficient. He put down all the training units he was with, and then as he went to Europe, where he was transferred after that. His rank he even put when he was promoted, the engagements he served in, if he was honorably discharged and when. And then there's a note down here, wounded degree undetermined, about October 14, 1918. And what's not listed here is I actually found out later on that he was actually captured in October for a while and escaped, but he didn't put that on the form here. So you get a lot of information from forms like this on a person, a lot more than you might find by talking to family members. And I mentioned the draft registration cards. These are on Ancestry now. And about 24 million men between the ages of 18 to 45 had to fill these cards out in 1917 and 1918. And so even if your relative may not have served but was between that age and was male, they probably fill out one of these cards, and these are great because it describes the person, job, family. And you can see over here, like for your height, you're either tall, medium, are short, your build, but what's really neat is number 3, they ask about features, you know, if you were missing a hand, things like that. And I have one relative that served, they actually listed all the tattoos all over his arms and hands. So these forms are great for things like that, because I would have never known this guy had tattoos. And in 1917, the fact that it mentioned his forearms and even his knuckles were tattooed. So these forms have a lot of information about people that we may not have photos of. And so this is a draft card. What's really funny is he mentions that he had a physical disability, that he had weak eyes, then he was later drafted and served in combat in Europe.
Headaches.
And sadly, Lewis comes down with tuberculosis. He may have picked it up in Europe during the war. Ancestry is also digitized. These are the national homes for disabled veterans or volunteer soldiers. We know as a Veterans Administration today, the VA in Dayton, Ohio is one of the largest. It's still operating. So he left Covington and went for treatment in 1926 to Dayton, Ohio, and he spent about 6 months in the hospital there being treated for tuberculosis. He was discharged in 1926 and returned home. But these are fantastic. Anybody that served in the Civil War, World War I, or World War II that may have gone to a veterans home, a lot of these are available online now. And you can contact the VA as well. And sadly, he dies in 1928 from tuberculosis, and he's buried. But they have these headstone applications on Ancestry now up through 1963. So anybody that died prior to 63, these are the cards that fill out. So anytime a veteran dies and the family requests a stone, this is the cards they fill out. And it gives you a lot of information, again, his name, his rank, his company, the unit he served with, and this is all verified before you get the headstone. So once again, you get all this information about where he was, who he served with, and you can take that information and do even more research. And for me, like I had people that died in 64, so I missed the cutoff for the cards. And of course, newspapers. We have many of the local newspapers on microfilm, so I went to our newspaper index. And we can see he's on the front page in October of 1918. This is off the Kentucky Times-Star, October 17, 1918. He sent his mother a telegram. Back then, you couldn't pick up a phone and call your mother and say, hey, I'm okay, or send her an email. He was actually, a telegram sent her to let her know that he had been captured. He was missing in action, but he was returned safely to his unit. So at least she knew that he was okay. And then because of his war service, when he dies in 1928, he actually makes the front page not once, but 2 days in a row. And you can see his picture over there, Sound Taps for War Veteran, and it talks about his life in Covington, also his time as a soldier. He gives a full biographical sketch about his combat tour. So the newspapers have a lot of information. And he served with the 20th Infantry Regiment. They were part of the 1st Infantry Division. So they arrived in France in June 26, 1917. And you can see the different battles the unit fought in. And he was actually, as you saw with his card, these were the 2 that he was engaged in. You can see this regiment suffered 4,800 casualties during the time. Those were wounded and killed. And they were the last division that returned home in 1919. So many of the men, like you saw with my grandfather, stayed overseas for almost like 7 or 8 months after the war was over. So there are a lot of books. I mean, I could go on all day about the different print resources that are available, but this is one I went downstairs and found this because there's forums that we use are gone. And this book is just on the battle alone, so you can take these books and find information about the units. You might get lucky, there might be an oral history or a letter that your relative wrote that shows up. But you can see here, so that's the 1st Division, and you can see on the specific date where they were in France in a specific battle, so you get an idea of where your ancestor was, what they were doing, by a lot of books that are available at your public library. So you get a good feel for the conditions and their service.
So France.
That is France. And of course, there are a lot of national sites, international sites. This is the Library of Congress. They're chronicling America. Has anybody used this site? They are digitizing small newspapers from around the United States from 1836 up until 1922, and they're full scans of each newspaper. So you can search by state, by newspaper, or you can search by person. So I was curious about Lewis to see what else I could find. So I put his name in, and he shows up, and this is a New York newspaper. And every day, back then, the casualty lists were actually printed in the newspapers. Those wounded, missing, or killed in action were printed in the paper every day. So you can see on this day in October, Lewis actually shows up in the missing in action column, Covington, Kentucky. And then later on, I found out when he was returned to duty, it also lists that he'd returned to duty like 3 weeks later. So you can use local sources, national sources, and so on to find a lot of information. And I've been having a tough time tracking down my great-grandfather's unit in World War I, and I've had a lot of success through the Library of Congress Chronicling America, because even though he was in New York, there's this really small Oklahoma paper that was digitized, and there was a guy that served with him, and so the Oklahoma paper follows this guy throughout Europe. You know, he was with, I think, the 399th Motor Truck Company, so every couple of weeks, this Oklahoma newspaper prints this thing about this guy that was in the same unit, so I could follow my grandfather in Europe through this guy who was born and raised in Oklahoma. So things to consider. And of course, the National Archives and Records Administration. Has anybody ever tried to get records from them? Yeah, they've got great stuff. They have all the military service records. You can actually get online if you're considered next of kin. You can do the online, or if you're the veteran themselves, you can actually fill it out online and get it. Or like the rest of us, you have to fill out the SF-180. That's what it looks like. And with acronyms, it actually stands for Special Form 180. And things to know about, they consider next of kin spouse, sibling, parent, or child. So grandchildren, nieces, nephews, we don't count as next of kin. So you cannot do the EVET Rex, the electronic request. You have to fill out the paper and send it in. You have to mail or fax it in. I've never faxed anything to them. I just worry it would disappear. Sometimes you have to provide a proof of death. You just send in an obituary or a death notice. They will send you the DD-214, which is the separation papers. But now you can check boxes to request medical records. And prior to March 1953, they have a 62-year privacy cutoff. Anything 62 years or younger is held by the government. It's considered private. They won't release it, only to the veteran. But from 62 years to the date, so March 28, 1953, and after that, you can request the official military personnel file, or the OMPF. So it's something to keep in mind. And you'll see on the form, if you go there, they have all these boxes. You want to check the medical box. You want to check the OMPF box, because if you don't, they will only send you this discharge paper. So make sure you check those boxes at the bottom. And this is what the EVET Rex looks like. I did this for my father for his Vietnam service, and I got on there, I sent it in, and I got it within a couple of weeks. It was great. And then on the right there, that is the SF-180 that you have to fill out and mail in. And they don't charge you for the separation papers. They'll mail those to you for free. Now, if they do have the OMPF, they do charge. You can see if it's 5 pages or less, it's a flat fee of $25. If it's over 6 pages, it jumps up to $70 flat fee. So there might be 6 pages, or there might be 600, but you're going to pay $70. But what's really funny is if you see the persons of exceptional prominence. These are actors, athletes, famous Americans. So like you can get Elvis's record. It's only 80 cents per page for a minimum of $20. So you can get like Elvis's records cheaper than you can get your grandfather's records. So. Yes, sir.
On this fees, do that hold true for like you as the son?
I think so, yeah. I think that only the veterans get everything free.
Okay.
The rest of us will have to pay for it.
Because I have got stuff free from them.
Yeah, the separation paper is free and all of this, I think, unless you're the veteran, we have to pay for it. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned medical records. Are you saying that in, what was it, 52 years?
62 years.
62 years, my medical records from when I was in the military, anybody with one line?
Yeah, it goes to the archives and becomes public record after that.
Wow.
Because they're thinking it's 62 years from, yeah, that you'll be deceased, is what they're thinking. Yeah.
Same thing on the census.
Yeah, census the same way.
Okay.
Yeah, 62 years is the number they came up with. Census is 70.
I can
72.
remember probably about 8 years ago, I got about 80 pages for $10.
So it's jumped up considerably since then.
Considerably.
I think the fees went up because they had such a huge request volume increase that
Yeah.
Probably so.
to dissuade some people from spending the money, they increased. That's what I understood.
And it says it here too that right now they get 4,000 to 5,000 requests per day. So imagine working there. You go on vacation, you come back, and you're
Your inbox is
They got more than one person.
Yeah, they do, and I know people that work there. And we've all heard about the 1973 fire, because the federal government was really good about putting a single copy of one record in a building, an old wooden building. They did that with the 1890 census, but also with military personnel records. And we all know people that lost many of the records. And you can see, like, for the Army, if you were discharged between 1912 and 1960, 80% of those records were destroyed. You can see for the Air Force. And I do know in St. Louis, they're actually trying to recreate many of these files now. So they have teams of archivists that are working using other sources from around the country to try to rebuild these files for people. So it's worth checking all the boxes to see what you get. And patience, young grasshopper, because if you have a family reunion next month and you want to write and get your grandfather's stuff, good luck. It takes about 90+ days for a response, and so as an experiment, on January 7th, I filled out the SF-180 and I mailed it and I marked it in my calendar. So today we're 80 days later and I'm still waiting for my great-grandfather's separation papers. And then what's really neat about the National Archives is they have all of the military records for all the wars, all the units that served, like all the way down to the company and platoon level. You can sometimes find the after-action reports. They have all the unit diaries. And they just put online the finding date for World War I, and I found my great-grandfather's company. And so on February 19th, 2015, so almost in a month and a half, I sent it an email, and I said, all I would like to know is how many pages are in the file, and I gave them the record group all the way down to the file number. I would just like this file copied for this company, the 399, and I'm still waiting for a response today. So I know sometimes some of the other NARA's got branches all over the United States. Some of the other branches respond quicker, but they're just getting hammered in St. Louis, like 5,000 responses a day, so when you send in requests. And College Park is the same way, where they have most of the military records. So patience. And that takes us to World War II. And we can see some wasps here, and what's kind of neat is you see the plane in the back. It's no packing mama.
The history on that photo is that that was taken in Ohio.
That's right.
Yeah.
At, what is the base now?
Rickenbacker.
Yeah. So December 7th, 1941, the United States enters World War II after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The war had been going on since '39. And there are so many images now. I've actually even seen color photos of Pearl Harbor that people are digitizing and making available. So if your relative served in World War II, he either served in the European, there were two theaters. There was the European theater and the Pacific theater. And once again, I went to West Point and they have this wonderful map of Europe, and you can see, you know, all the information about where the U.S. went through Africa, through Italy, D-Day, and so on. So you can, once again, follow where your relatives went. And the same for the Pacific. And once again, the Army, I said 16 million people served in the United States military. Half of those, 8.3 million, served in the U.S. Army. So half of those that enlisted served in the Army, and they have all the enlistment records from 38 to 46. They haven't digitized the actual record, but they've made like a typed transcription here. So it gives you the name, like here was a Martha S. Bell, and then all the information. She was from Cook County, Illinois. Tells you she served with the WWII, the Women Army Corps, and tells you she had 4 years of college, and her civil occupation, she was an author, editor, or reporter, and she served in the military for several years. And you can see she was 65 inches tall, so 5'5" and 113 pounds. So you get a lot of information about a person. So we're going to look at my grandfather. Like most of us, we probably have a relative that served in World War II that may still be living. In my case, he's deceased, but I had his full name, William Ambrose. I had his birth and death dates from my grandmother. The Social Security death index is available through Ancestry. I was able to find that, because when you fill out the SF-180, they want the SOCH, and they want the serial number. If you don't have the serial number, you have to have the SOCH in order for them to search. But they prefer both, but if you don't, you can find this. I knew he served in the Navy, and I knew he served from some stuff my grandmother gave me from 43 to 45. One thing she gave me was a Navy log when he served. He went through aviation ordnance maintenance school, and so they put out this little booklet, especially in the World War II and onward. They put together all these publications where people went through training. So the handsome guy in the red circle was my grandfather, and they put little bios. So you may know where they grew up, you may not, but this list is parents' names, where he worked. He worked for Grumman, so he was actually making military aircraft before he was drafted. They mentioned he went through school for January 11th, 1943. And then he loved to bowl. I had no idea he was a bowler. So it's like things like this that give you the background information about somebody. And she also gave me his induction notice from January 30th, 1943. And what I find fascinating is, so he gets this in the mail January 30th or 31st, and they tell him he has to report no later than the 10th of February. So you saw in the previous form that he was working for Grumman. He had a full-time job. So he had 10 days to like stop working, say goodbye to the family, and report for duty. So it's not a whole lot of time. And then she also gave me his Realm of the Golden Dragon card. And we'll talk about this later, but when you went overseas and you crossed on a ship at the international date line, you got this, they had a ceremony and you got this little card. And this card caused me some confusion that I'll talk about in a few minutes. So I sent off a long time ago for his separation papers. And for those of you that haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. This is the form that you will get for free from the National Archives. And there's a lot of information on this. Induction, birthplace, they gave you his street address. You can see birth date, where he was born. The two different schools, he went to Aviation Ordnance School and Aviation Radar School, 14 weeks for one, 2 for another. Where he worked, he was a metalsmith. He worked for Grumman up until he retired, building aircraft, and later actually made, worked with NASA making the lunar module, which is really neat. But the most important stuff is over here. You see all this weird stuff? These are his ranks. So he was an able seaman, a seaman, and an aviation ordnanceman, 2E, 1E. And then the really important stuff here is red. And the best thing I can tell you to do with this stuff, because of all the abbreviations and acronyms, is write it out. And on the bibliography I handed out today, there's some links. The Navy has been really good about putting out websites that break down all the abbreviations. So you can go to those websites. For example, like the NTS, that's Naval Training School. It was upstate New York. It was a former summer camp they converted to a basic training unit. And then they sent them to NASTC in Memphis. That was Naval Air Training Technical Command School. And then they sent them to NAGS, which is Naval Air Gunnery School in Hollywood, Florida. That's where my father was born. I was a kid, my father said, oh, I was born in Hollywood, Florida. And I'm like, but I thought you were from New York. And it was later on when I talked to my grandmother, I figured out why my father was born in Florida. So my grandparents got married, they moved to Florida, and my father was born, but he was there for gunnery school. And then you see this, in this thing, I didn't read all this over, so I missed this thing here where it says CASU F48. And I learned the hard way. I completely missed that, so it's really good to write it all out and try to solve it like a puzzle, what each one of the abbreviations means. But I saw that he went to FAW8, which is a flight air wing in California, based out of Shoemaker, California. Totally missed the next thing, the CASU, and then he left the service at Lido Beach, Long Island in 1945. So remember the Realm of the Golden Dragon card? If you have anybody, or if you've served in the Navy and you want photos of ships, or if you just have an interest in Navy ships, the Naval History and Heritage Command is this wonderful website where they're documenting Navy history from the very first ship that ever sailed for the United States all the way up to present ships. And they have a dictionary of American naval fighting ships. So I saw the USS Ormsby. You can go in, all alphabetical order. I found the ship, click run, read more. And this was an attack transport, and it tells you when it was built, what it did. In this page, I only cut the first third of the page. This goes on paragraph after paragraph about service in World War II. So you can document where your relative went overseas if they were on a ship or served in the Navy. But see, I had some confusion because I saw that card, and I thought it was kind of strange that he went to aviation school, but he was serving on a ship. So that's the USS Ormsby in 1943, so 2 years before he was on board. And there's also another great website, navsource.org. This is done by naval veterans. This is all volunteer. And they're also documenting the history of the Navy through photographs. So these men and women scan all of these ship photos and make them available. And their ship histories are even more informative and colorful than the actual one sponsored by the U.S. Navy. They even have the campaign ribbons, more information on the ship. They have all these campaign dates that take you to the various campaigns. And I don't have it here, but if you scroll down, they have all the photos of each ship. So they might have 10 photos, they might have 50 photos, and they have links to each one of those photos. So you can get all kinds of information. So I thought he was on the Ormsby, and then about 6 or 8 months ago, I sat back down with that form, and I realized I had missed that CASU. That actually stands for Combat or Carrier Aircraft Service Unit, 48. They had like 50 plus of these, and they were sent out all over the Pacific to help the Navy, like the carriers. So all the carrier aircraft, anytime they were damaged or needed maintenance, you had these special units that were set up on islands, so they would bring the planes in and they would repair the planes to get them back into combat. So at first I thought he was on the Ormsby, and it turns out he was actually taken to Guam and then shipped out to Saipan in the Marianas. And you can see this is where he was, and there's a photo from 1945 of the air base, the Canapang Air Base in Saipan. And you can see compared, like here are the Philippines, New Guinea, Australia's down here, and so there's Guam, and that's where he was for all of 1945. Has anybody used Fold 3? This is a great database. They've been digitizing military records, especially World War I and World War II. It's not the most user-friendly. It takes you a while to figure out how it works, but they have great stuff. And what's really neat is they have all the cruise books and all the ship diaries for all the ships that were in World War II that served overseas. And we're talking day-to-day diaries that were filled out by the captain or officers. So I put in the Ormsby, and sure enough, I find the war diary from April 1945 when my grandfather was going overseas, and it talks about them leaving San Francisco with a convoy. And remember that realm of the Golden Dragon card? Well, it mentions here they advanced the date from the 2nd of April to the 3rd as they crossed the international date line. And so there he was on that ship that day, getting that little card filled out into the ceremony. But what's more exciting is the next day I read, and they talk about how another ship, one of the escorts, picked up a supersonic contact and attacked with depth charges because they thought there was a Japanese submarine out there. So here's my grandfather going across the Pacific in this transport ship he's on. You know, they're taking maneuvers because there might be a Japanese submarine out there somewhere. And it's just day after day with these war diaries of what happened. And you can also track, like I was able to track when he got off in Guam and when they shipped him through the war diaries. And then I also found they digitized the war diaries for his unit, the Combat Air Service Unit 48. And so he arrives in April, and down here's a whole paragraph about that month where they serviced and fixed 60 aircraft for a total of 42,000 man-hours. So this unit, I think, had about 1,000 guys. So that's how you think about these guys working around the clock to get these aircraft serviced and back on. And he actually serviced and served on what they call the PBYs. They were the amphibious planes. The harbor where he was is where all the amphibious planes came in. So I've learned, like, you know, I talked to my grandmother. My grandmother got part of the story. My grandfather was deceased, so I've been able to like recreate his entire military service in the Pacific by using all these sources. And it's just amazing. Some other great sites, because we think about military research as a lot in World War II. I love this photo because sometimes it is like driving into the desert. There was just so much available. You have to. Sometimes it's hard to find, difficult to get to. So I mentioned all the service branches have wonderful websites. This is the U.S. Marine. They have great libraries. They're really good about when you contact them. You can visit them to do research. You can send them emails. We're talking unit histories, information on people, and so on. So, and I have all the different branches on the bibliography I handed out. This is the U.S. Army Center for Military History, and I've sent them emails before, and they get right back to you, and they send you PDFs. So anybody in the Army, definitely take a look at their website. And of course, in Dayton, Ohio, we have the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. And for a long time, they had aircraft in history where you could go and they had a link to every single aircraft ever flown in the Air Force. But since I did this presentation last time, they had a little note here that they no longer maintain this part of their website, that you now have to contact the Air Force Historical Studies. But I've discovered if you search for the aircraft here on Google, it brings up the history. They just don't have links to it on their page anymore. They used to have a whole list of every single plane that you could just click on, so you have to work a little bit harder now. Or you can just go up there and look at the aircraft. But you can find these fact sheets, so if you have somebody that flew in a B-29, it gives you the whole history of the B-29. And I don't think it's on this one. Some of them even have the serial numbers or the ship number. So if you had a relative that flew and they actually have the ship number, you can get information on the specific plane they flew in. Plus lots of photos. You can see the photos. And these are links to the aircraft they have on display, and they actually have a whole World War II gallery right now. So you can click on that for more information about the planes. And the Air Force Historical Research Agency. And remember before I mentioned like bomb groups and things like that? Here's it's the 303rd Air Expeditionary Group, but you can get the whole history of World War II of this group. And you get the patches. And so that's another great website. And of course, the Veterans History Project. This is through the Library of Congress, but they are relying on you and I to interview veterans of all branches of service, those that served in peacetime and during conflict. And they have a whole link about how you can click on a link and learn how to do oral histories with the release form, the equipment you need, and you can donate this to the Veterans History Project in DC. And what's really neat is, so I jumped on there and I just typed in Covington, Kentucky, and they have interviews with 16 different veterans that live or lived in Covington, Kentucky. And a lot of these you can click on. They either have an audio and sometimes they have the video oral history where you can listen to the full oral history. So say like in my case, my grandfather's deceased, but I find a guy that served with him, I might be able to listen to somebody talk about what he experienced, so you get a feeling of what your ancestor or relative went through by hearing somebody else talk about it. So that's another great tool. And things we don't think about, like the American Legion, the VFW. The American Legion has digitized all of their magazines, I think from 1919 up until 2014. So if your relatives, was part of the American Legion, you can search. This is fully searchable, and it brings up the entire magazine for that given day. The VFW has not done the same thing yet, but you can take a look. And unit websites. Remember Louis Bresser from the 28th Infantry Regiment? They actually have a great website that talks about the history of the unit. And there are a lot of veterans that now with the internet have gone out and created these web pages. My father's Vietnam unit actually has their own web page, so I got a lot of information about his unit off of that. And of course, you can come to your local public library, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of books available about World War I, World War II, anything from how to find information on your father's war to people's biographies about their time in the service, histories about units. And I don't know if anybody went to see Rick Atkinson. He was
in the library.
He was fantastic a couple weeks ago.
Oh, were you there?
I was there.
Yeah, we were too. It was great.
And if you're interested in the U.S. Army in Africa and Europe, his trilogy is probably one of the best written. It's, I think, 3 volumes are about 1,000 pages each, but they're chock full of letters, diaries, oral histories that tell the story of the U.S. Army, and done very well. And he's now working on a Revolutionary War thing. And it was fascinating because it took him like, I think, 10 years to publish all 3 of these.
Yeah.
And the next trilogy he's working on, he said he still has 15 months worth of research. So I mean, a guy sits down and does his research before he writes. And you can come see me at the local History and Genealogy Department at 502 Scott Boulevard in Covington, because we have access to all the databases I showed today. We have all the information on Kenton County veterans. We have the newspaper index, newspaper collection, local history files. We have faces and places. So, and I have a business card if you want to pick one of those up on the way out. Thank you, and I thought it was appropriate to end with civil rights.
Is it possible you could go back to the tombstone that you showed very early? And if I can have your permission, I'd like to say something about that. I'm Marv Record with the Campbell County Historical Society, and I've been doing a lot of research in cemeteries, and I'm always fascinated by that dash between birth date and death. So what is happening, we're finding a lot of tombstones out there that are unreadable, and the worst thing you can do is take your wire brush that puts about 50 years on that stone in about 5 seconds. So it can be cleaned with water and soap, a little Clorox maybe, but the reality is plain old flour that you cook with, you kind of splotch that on there and smooth it out, and then you can take pictures of it, and the flour will just disintegrate into the ground, but you can read everything that's on there as opposed to scratching and whatever.
Wow.
And, 20 years from now, somebody else may need to do that again, but if you take that wire brush there, 20 years from now, you won't be able to read anything. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for this wonderful
Oh,
presentation.
you're welcome.
Yes, indeed. It's very interesting.
And if you have questions, like when you get home and you jump into this, like I said, it's complex, so feel free to shoot me an email or call me. Sometimes it helps to talk to people, and especially when you get to like NARA, because they've got wonderful stuff, but you could spend years trying to find what you need. And getting somebody to reply to your email.
Is your email in here?
I've got cards.